Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Joining us on Newsmaker Sunday, a guy you have become really familiar with over the years, especially when it comes to immigration. Paul Babeu is the sheriff of Pinal County, but announced this week that he is running for Congress in U.S. House District 1 in Arizona. That is Ann Kirkpatrick's seat that she currently holds, but of course, the Democrat, the incumbent, is vacating that because she is challenging John McCain for the U.S. Senate. Paul Babeu is our guest on Newsmaker Sunday.
Thanks, John.
That's a massive district, one of the largest in the United States. It encompasses, let me just run it down for you, it encompasses all the way up through Flagstaff, the White Mountains, south to Pinal County. Northern Pima County is part of that district, and it includes the Native American tribes.
Yes, when you look at it geographically, larger than the state of New York. And very similar issues to all the issues that I deal with in Pinal County. A good portion of the district, a fourth, almost a third, is Pinal County. People I've represented for not only elected, re-elected as a sheriff. And bottom line, I can't screw up being sheriff because people's lives are on the line, right? And so I have a strong track record there of a core service probably closest to the people.
Can you screw up in Congress and get away with it? Obviously you can, because people do it all the time.
Congress is screwed up, and that's part of the motivator for me, and I live it day in, day out. 7 years I brought this fight on fighting the drug cartels, fighting for a secure border, not just as a sheriff, but as an Army officer.
I mean, some people would say, well, that sounds like a one-issue candidate.
Well, this is where there's a pattern here. The pattern is the federal government gets involved in everything where they shouldn't be involved, and then the very core responsibilities like this, securing our international border, protecting our citizens, they fail to do. How does it fall to the local sheriff? You look at Forest Health. My deputies have evacuated families in Kearney and Superior. The wildfires are even worse up north, right? Not only threatening families' lives, but our property, our economy. And what do we get from the Forest Service? We get obstacles put in our way. And instead of a reasonable, environmentally safe plan to properly thin our forests, we get all this bureaucracy. Same thing when it comes to mining, same thing when it comes to the EPA.
So that's why you want to do it. Let me quickly ask you before we move on to a couple of things here. I want to get a couple of issues that are important right now. Essentially, why does a sheriff in Pinal County want to run for Congress? And this is your second try.
Yes.
Why is it you desperately want to be in Congress?
Well, it's not. My passion is service. My entire adult life, I've been in uniform, both in the military and the reserve component, served a tour in Iraq, commanded soldiers down on the border, and also as a lawman, as a police officer, as a sheriff, and I'm an oath keeper. Any promise that I make, I've actually followed through on. A novel concept when it comes to running for office, right? And being the only lawman, being the only military veteran, when we have these issues and the sacred oath that we as a community have to our veterans and their families, and it's broken. And no place closer than here in Arizona, where we've had a front row seat of that. And this is where we as citizens in our republic, I feel I'm compelled to run because of the bad situation that our nation is in. And it's something that has always been important to me, to serve my community, serve my country. And I believe that I'm far more qualified than other candidates who would run.
Okay.
And I'm going to let the people decide that.
I want to take you back, because obviously the last run for Congress was mired in controversy.
Sure.
You were forced to drop out because of this scandalous stuff that came out, okay? So let's show this package. I want to get your reaction to it, and we'll just point by point clear the air on this thing. Take a look.
In regards to this matter, the individual that we're talking about, Jose, that there was a personal relationship, and separate and apart from that, he was a volunteer for my political campaign, and actually was in charge of our website for some time.
Surrounded by Pinal County officials, Sheriff Paul Babeu admitted to having a relationship with this man, Jose, a man who claims to be Babeu's former lover and makes some very serious allegations against the Pinal County Sheriff in the Phoenix New-Times.
This idea of deportation was never an issue. I don't have the authority to deport anybody.
During the press conference, Babeu elaborated, saying when the relationship ended, Jose became a paid staffer who took control of the sheriff's campaign website, at one point impersonating the sheriff himself.
I tend to believe him. I don't know Jose. We need people with character in Washington, and we'll see if Arizona can support an openly gay Republican congressman.
Support for the sheriff seems to be overwhelming in Pinal County. Colleagues, voters, somewhat surprised by the news, but willing to stand by a sheriff they say has made some very positive changes.
Paul lives that. Paul has been out in our community for many years, has never advocated one way or another. No one is, you've always heard rumors and allegations and things of that nature, and you know what? What people do in their own bedroom is their own business.
Paul Babeu is our guest this week on Newsmaker Sunday, announced for Congress.
Yes.
All this stuff. Now, when you watch that, that's from about 4 years ago, when you ran before.
Yes. That was a very difficult time in my life, both personally and as well politically. And this is, I made the decision to stay as sheriff, to seek re-election. Because of all that, I'm the guy who requested actually a criminal investigation of the Attorney General and the Solicitor General. I was sad that it took so long, and I had to live through that until after the election. They fully exonerated me. There was no threatening of any sort,
You didn't
and that was
threaten
determined.
this young man, Jose.
That was that absolutely
You
proven.
also pointed out when that was running,
Yes.
you said he was not a paid staffer.
Absolutely. There were so many falsehoods. This was a smear attack against me personally to get out the fact that I was gay. And they had all of these allegations, the worst things you can say about a cop. Because if I just accuse you of something, people are going to say, well, John Hook, it must be true. The sheriff said somebody else. And this
The
is where
accusation is damaging.
the accusation. But the good news is the people re-elected me. The people saw through this falsehood. I was always open to my friends, to my family. It never was a lie. I never lied about anything here.
You just didn't want to make it a...
Well, that's my regret. This is the thing, John. I felt that nobody should have to know that. I never made it an issue.
That you're gay.
That
You're
I'm
talking
gay.
about- okay.
I'm gay. So what's the big deal? Let's move on. And that's where I was afraid of how people would react, quite frankly. That's my regret.
So is this
that I wish I had
liberating?
come out.
Is this liberating in some way?
You know, for me to not live in that concern, and, quite honestly, I was pleasantly surprised because people said it didn't matter. What matters is your value, your contributions to our community, and merit. That's what should matter.
How did you find a place, Paul, in the Republican Party, which has not necessarily been friendly to gay rights and gay causes?
Well, you know what? I would disagree in concept to what you said, because a lot of people have this opinion that somehow Republicans are not only narrow-minded, they're haters, or they're not accepting. I found just the contrary was true. People in my county, I have nearly 500,000 people in Pinal County, rural county, right? The most ardent supporters of mine were self-identified conservatives, and my closest opponent was 42 percentage points behind me, John. So this wasn't just it was a super landslide. And so I was overwhelmed by that show of support and love, got more votes than anybody from president, senator, congressman, or legislature in my county. And what it tells, I'm the living example that there is change. And we've had a lot of change in the past few years. And basically, look, I'm a military veteran. I've been a cop. Nobody asked me as I was chasing a criminal down the street, or when I would receive life-saving medals for saving people's lives, whether I was straight or I'm gay.
That gets into what Barry Goldwater said years ago. I don't care if they're gay, I just care if they can shoot straight.
Right.
Right? All right, let's move on.
Thank you, John.
NAU, a shooting Friday. There was another one in Houston. I don't know if you call this a classic school shooting, if there is such a thing, because this could have happened outside a bar, outside a restaurant. This was a dispute between 4 guys, and somebody grabs a firearm.
Right.
Do we need some type of further gun control in this country? Better background checks. Obviously, Martha McSally now in Southern Arizona introduced something today to try to get at better background checks. What's the answer here?
Well, I talked with Sheriff Pribble of Coconino County this morning. I talked to the police chief of the Community College District in Pinal County, which we have 5+ campuses. And the bottom line here is we don't need another law or regulation, because we already have laws on the books to create safe, gun-free school zones. How has that worked?
Not particularly well, frankly.
Well, here's why. Because now we create this false sense of security to people that nobody can carry a gun except a cop or a criminal. right? So now everybody's disarmed, and we're going to see more of this, and we're going to see an evolution, I believe, on this issue, because who disobeys the laws? The criminals. That's why we call them criminals. And so what could have, if we had a different law, what would have stopped this incident from happening?
This gets at this argument that really the heart of this issue generally is what's in their head, not in their hands.
Mental health issues, and this is where I can speak to that, because 1,100 prisoners in my county jail, more than half of them have underlying mental health issues, and in addition to addiction issues.
How do you get at that with some type of background check? Can you ascertain what's in a person's head through a background check?
To some degree, or law enforcement contact, or there's some type of report. Absolutely, and this is where we've struggled with this from down in Tucson, Jared Loeffner. It wasn't because he had a political agenda, right? It was because there was underlying mental health issues, and we as a society, not just Arizona, this shouldn't be connected to just weapons and gun laws. We as a society have done a very poor job of taking care of those in our community with mental health issues. It connects to everything. I know people in my family, friends of mine who have had mental health issues. I don't think anybody's untouched by this.
Let me ask you, I want to clear this up. You know, we've got such a division in Washington right now. Would you consider yourself classically a member or a Tea Party person? Would you characterize yourself that way?
I would consider myself a Second Amendment, pro-freedom, for capitalism, for border security, and it depends. I've seen people in the Tea Party who I've disagreed with on issues, and people in the mainstream establishment that I very strongly disagree with on issues. My issues, I think, are probably as well known of anybody who's elected in our state, and you're going to see a fighter on these issues that concern our families. Tick them off for me.
If border security is number one for you,
and border security, jobs in our economy. This is, John, there's 94 million Americans who are of working age who are not in the workforce. This is the all-time high record.
Right.
So at a time when 62% is the actual job participation, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is where the Obama administration, through the EPA, is trying to shut down the coal mines, the power plants here in Arizona. This is the worst time, because not only those thousands of jobs that are affected, you pay utility rates, I do. These are going to jack up at a time when we can least afford it. I will work to stop that wrong-headed action at a time when our economy is struggling.
What other issues would be top of your agenda?
Forest health.
Now that's
what
something
I talked
you really
about,
haven't dealt with.
That's something I have. There's wildfires that happen in my county. We're the guys who evacuate families. When those fires, the wildfires, when I sent over a dozen deputies up north to help evacuate those families.
Right, but that's not exactly, you're not steeped in forest policy. You're probably getting up to speed, and I would say the guy you probably lean on that issue is Jon Kyl.
Well, Jon Kyl, I talked with Senator Kyl, but this is the fact. I live, and the people of our state live in the effect and the impact of the failures of the federal government. Bottom line, as a freshman member, or any member of Congress, the key to them is understanding what the issues are, advocating for our issues and for Arizona with these bureaucratic agencies in Washington to hold them accountable, right? And at a time when we see politicians run for office, everybody says border security. What the heck have they done? And then what do they do when they get into office?
So back to forest for a second.
Yes.
What I think you're suggesting is that environmental policy has trumped. Is that what you're saying?
Environmental policy
has trumped,
or the name of it, and this is, look at Forefry. Here we have 4 national forests up north, and now where the Forest Service has a way to properly utilize certain acreage of all these forests to thin them, but it's not to the degree that it really protects us from a public safety perspective, that this is a tinderbox because of the droughts. We're going to see these forests that are in jeopardy if we don't quickly find new ways, not only to address that, but how it can complement us for our economy, to help the lumber industry, to thin the forest, to take the underbrush, to take the dead trees, to take the trees that are smaller, so we can build our forests back to truly have that's why they call it forest health.
Do you believe that these droughts are tied to some type of global warming?
There's a lot of scientists and data that's out there that suggests that that's the case, and then there's others that say no.
So you don't think the debate is over, as the president would like to say?
The debate certainly is not over. However, I'm a realist. There is impact. What I'm saying when I talked about the coal mines, hey, if we're going to have some reform and we're going to look at all of these issues, if what we do as people affect our climate, affect our world, then we've got to do it in a way that doesn't harm us and further than, and we're one country. We're not the whole world here.
Right.
And so the United States is doing as good, if not the best job of most countries in a lot of these areas. So don't tank our economy further than what it is at a time when we can least afford it.
And especially unless China and India are going to get on board, because that's I mean, if you don't solve that, you don't solve the
These
problem.
are our competitors.
Right.
And why are we giving everybody else a competitive advantage when not only we don't need to, it's harmful to us and our economy?
When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about border security with Paul Babeu, the current Pinal County Sheriff, first elected in 2008, the first Republican sheriff elected in the history of Pinal County, now running for Congress out of District 1. We're back with Sheriff Babeu in a moment on Newsmaker Sunday. Paul Babeu is our guest on Newsmaker Sunday. Announced this week he is running for Congress, Part 2. He did it in 2011, announced, tried to run in 2012, had to drop out of the race.
Extra strength now.
Yeah, right. What did that teach you in the end when you had to drop out? There was all the allegations about the relationship with the young man. What?
Well, further humility. For me, this was, I think, the most difficult times in our life is really the measure of people.
What did it teach you?
Well, you don't pull the sheets over your head and just hide from people. You go out, you answer head on. I was honest about everything, and I shared with everything. Look, I've been further vetted than Barack Obama when he was elected president, quite honestly. And people know far more about me, John, than they ever wish to know, or I ever wish them to know. So
was it vindication in...
It was.
In what, 14 when you...
Not just election, but even fully vindicated. The word they used, and it's almost never used in law enforcement, just so you know, exonerated. And in fact, they had charges against him for harassment and some other issues. And you know what? So at the end of the day, that is a bad situation, that it was used by a lot of political opponents, surprise, surprise. And I think there's a double standard. I talked to Dr. Ben Carson. I had him in my county. I was with him all day. I drove 4 hours from Cochise County to Pinal, and we talked about this exact situation. And he looked at me and he said, Paul, you know what? A lot of people in the other party, the Democrat Party, look at me because I'm an African American and I'm a Republican, and they think somehow I'm a traitor, or I betrayed all these different things. And people try to fit people because of who they are in a certain box. I'm a Republican. I'm not going to be defined by these other issues. That's not how I live my life.
One more thing on this before we move on. I asked you in the break, and I want to ask you again. For any voter who says, you know, I like Babeu, I like what he stands for, he showed some judgment issues during this whole thing that they would say, that gives me a pause.
You know what?
What would you say to them?
And here's what I said then, and it's the same today. Everybody in their life has had difficulty with somebody in a relationship. And when that person gets upset, and then all of a sudden they come after you, right? And then they're going to show pictures. I happen to be an elected official.
Right.
You don't know what it's like. You know what it's like to be an anchor on Fox 10, but you don't know what it's like to be an elected official.
Well,
or
I think they're pretty similar.
You.
I think they're pretty similar in that if we show poor judgment, it's going to end up out there.
But the thing is, when you have personal things in your life that are used against you here for political purposes, I think people balanced all that. And at the end of the day, the totality of who I am as a person, my record of service, the good work that we've done, you know, people appreciated that, and thank God, because this is America, and it's 2015 now.
I got to ask you about what's going on in the House right now. We talked about the Tea Party earlier.
Yes.
The Tea Party has run off John Boehner. They ran off Cantor. They're having trouble finding a leader that they can coalesce around. Do you have any feeling if you were to be elected, you got to go into this hornet's nest? Is there anybody out there? And I'm thinking Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
Is that a guy you could feel comfortable with in a leadership position?
I really like Paul Ryan. And
would he be your choice given this current field?
Yeah, I like Paul Ryan. I know that locally a lot of people have been talking about Matt Salmon. I'm friends with him, and he's done a great job as a representative.
Has he actually put his name in the ring?
No, it's mentioned, and a lot of people are trying to encourage him. But I think Paul Ryan is probably best positioned. And look, you've got a lot of people. Everybody's got not just their ego, but their agenda. We've got to govern. And this, I think, is problematic to solve the issues of the day. We've got
No, I agree. And I think it's problematic
bills
for candidates. Because if Republicans now have the House, if they are unable to govern themselves, how can they govern the country?
Well, you mentioned the Tea Party running people off. These people have been in office, right, for 20 to 30 years, and they've survived years in that leadership position, which is the life and tenure of most of the leaders, and they've out-survived it. Bottom line, if you make promises to the people, you better honor them. And this is where I'm an oath keeper, and I fulfill my promises. If I ever can't, I'll come to you, just like if it's a friendship, and I better have a reason why and communicate that to you. That's what an elected official should do as well.
Let me ask you another one while we're on the subjects. Let's show tape number 6. What's your take on this Iran deal? And as a member of Congress, if you were to become a member of Congress, should Congress have been intimately involved in this discussion?
Yes. And this is where, not only as an Army officer, this is a passion of mine as well throughout my life as a citizen, and we need to be aware of our global environment. I would have voted against this. I'll say that right up front. And I believe that we gave up far too much. All of the sanctions were having an impact and pushed them to the brink of finally, Iran had no other choice. I can tell you, I'm the only veteran in this race. I served a tour in Iraq. As importantly, I went with AIPAC to Israel, understanding our main ally in the Middle East, right? Going to the border with Lebanon, where there's Hezbollah, going to the Golan Heights with Syria. There were small arms fires literally going on and an explosion while we were there, right? And seeing the Gaza Strip and all of these, look, they're surrounded by a lot of unsavory people that aren't necessarily not only our allies, but in some cases the enemies. And this is where what was created in Iraq, in Syria, and ISIS or ISIL, this is the failure. The biggest failure of Barack Obama when it comes to foreign policy is the fact that we pulled out. And you look through the last 100 years of foreign policy in the United States, heck, my dad fought in the Korean War. There's 28,600 soldiers there today as we're talking, guarding and defending that border. We have troops in Japan,
so pulling
and Germany.
Out and detaching, you think is not a good
decision. And we had a commitment, whether you agree with the war or not, the fact that we pulled out completely created a vacuum in an unstable situation.
We're back with Paul Babeu. More on the table after this. We're going to talk about Syria as well and what's happening there with Russia when we come back on Newsmaker Sunday. Back with Pinal County Sheriff Paul Babeu, who announced this week he is running for Congress for U.S. District 1. That's a seat currently held by Ann Kirkpatrick, who, as you know, is going after John McCain, trying to take his Senate seat. Let me ask you about the subject that nobody is talking about. 3/4 of our debt in this country comes from Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt.
Yes.
Who's going to fix that one? Because a lot of people go to Congress saying they're going to, and it never gets fixed.
Well, here's the problem. President Obama, I'm going to start with, had both control of the House and the Senate and had this opportunity, and our debt went off the charts. And our borrowing, now we're at $18.5 trillion. Far more important and troubling is the fact that gap debt, which is $110 trillion, all these promises that you just outlined of the, quote, entitlements, we're in trouble.
These are programs people count on, though, Paul.
Absolutely. And this is where the reform, you're looking at a guy who makes tough decisions for a living, right? Runs a 700-person full-time operation, critical service. We go to Washington. Absolutely, I will make tough votes, not for the people who are about to retire, but all of those commitments for when you're talking the age in the 40s and younger, complete reform. Absolutely. And it should be based on need and based on income and all of those things. No longer can we afford, we just can't afford it.
What does this come down to? You got 10 seconds. What does this race come down to for you?
This race comes down to, do you want somebody who's going to stand up, believes in the Constitution, does what he promises to do, which I have a record to prove that, and defend defend our rights here at home, advocate for Arizona. Nobody's going to not just out border security me, outperform when it comes to advocating for issues.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you, John.
Paul Babeu, the sheriff of Pinal County, now announced candidate, Republican candidate for District 1 in Arizona. Back on Newsmaker Sunday next week. We'll see you then. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, John.